Further up for how you do up here. Good to see you. February 6th, 2023 work session to order. Ms. Chaddock will lead us in the pledge. You know what I mean?
No. I believe it's allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
With liberty for all. Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members, and thank you for all that expressed an interest in our first true work session to discuss the monumental task of updating an over 100-year-old charter. Just talking to City Attorney Terry Miller, parts of the charter date back to the original incorporation of 1847, and then later in 1874, I believe that the bulk of the charter was actually drafted and several updates made via home rule since then in the last several decades. We first started this conversation of really wanting to update the charter from the standpoint of many of our current operating practices don't really match up hand in hand with what our existing charter says. And that's problematic because the charter is a very important document. It provides the framework for the city and how what business sectors of work we perform, how the city is governed, and it's really what I'll call and what I've explained to folks is the Constitution of the city of Dalton. We started in November of 2021, and the council had expressed a need at that time to really get this project across the finish line. I saw our former city attorney, Jim Bisson, who worked on this even in the past, 2015, I think, had prepared a draft, but we never have been able to quite get this work product across the finish line because it is a monumental task and there's a lot of important factors to consider. I'm not going to go into the details of all that because we've retained special counsel from minor firms, specifically Jonathan Bledsoe and Ken Mishu, to do the heavy lifting in drafting this charter. They started really the bulk of this work back in September, and I'm proud to say that them working with the city clerk, who really served as project manager for this, have prepared a draft that we will begin to consider corporately over the next couple of months. Jonathan will outline what that process will look like, but this is not a process that will occur quick. It's a process that will take time, and we want to get this right as opposed to getting it done quick. And we feel like at least the Shell charter, getting it in a position to approve and support corporately will take at least a couple of months, and we want to be available to meet with all the respective boards and authorities that would be affected by this. And again, this is the council's first opportunity to really see and hear what this first draft looked like. And then after that, Jonathan will explain the process of looking at our codes of ordinances, which are also problematic in some cases and outdated. And so what I would ask from staff perspective, so that we can memorialize any questions, concerns, or thoughts, is that if anybody has those from the audience, to maybe email those to our city clerk's office. That way we can get those questions and inquiries to the full mayor and council and the attorneys that worked on this for us. And then over the next 30 days, we'll respond to those and make, again, presentations to the respective boards and authorities. Unless there are any questions from me, I think at this time I'll turn it over to Jonathan Bledsoe.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Mayor and Council. As Andrew has said, this is a really important project, and I appreciate y'all letting us take this on. This is parts of our charter. Not only do they go back to 1874, but they also, we have provisions that have references to things we don't do anymore. There are conflicting provisions. There are things that conflict with what we do. And so this was a very important task for the city to take on. It's also something that the Georgia Municipal Association has been encouraging for quite some time. And a lot of cities don't want to do it because it is a monumental task. So we appreciate you letting us do that. I want to mention first, this is an effort that quite often takes a year or more just to get to your first draft. We pulled this together pretty quickly. We were tasked with doing it pretty quickly. We were only able to do that because of the team effort. The group that we pulled together, and I want to acknowledge them. Ken Mishu is here. He's done the lion's share of our drafting. Julia Griffiths from our office has done a lot of our research. Bill Jordan worked on some Dalton utilities issues. We've had Christian Bard of our office also involved in editing and dealing with some of the strategy for how to put this together. So I want to thank those folks for their participation. And let me tell you, I want to go through just some of the highlights of this, but before I do, I want to talk about how we did this process. We first started by consulting GMA. I had a number of conversations with Brucey Patel and others, excuse me, at GMA. We reviewed a number of other charters, Gainesville, Rome, Ringgold, and others. We went through the model charter. We did go through Jim Bisson's old draft. Mr. Bisson's here to make sure that we're doing this right. We had conversations with a number of different departments within the city, and we received feedback from everybody in those departments. And we've gone through probably 6 or 7 drafts now at this point. After receiving that feedback. And we believe this product brings the city more in line with other cities in the state now, and certainly in line with the model charter and the things that are recommended by GMA. And so as we go through it, I know you're going to have some questions. Some of those questions, again, email Ms. Chatham and we'll get the answers. But a lot of those questions will fall into the categories of are these things required? Do we need to do things differently? And they fall into really 3 categories to me. It's either something that's required by state law, it's something that is recommended by GMA, or there are some judgment calls. And so you all need to know which of those categories the thing that you're asking about falls into. And we'll be glad to get you those answers and let you know. Let me talk just a moment about what a charter is and what it's not. A charter is a broad grant of powers to a city. It's a skeletal outline of how the city is supposed to work. It's not a list of each and everything that you do or that you might want to do. It's supposed to be broad because the things that you can do by ordinance that you may want to change in the future, that may want to be changed 50 years from now, you want to do those things by ordinance or resolution. This just gives you the power now and the power 50 years, 100 years from now to do the things that need to be done. And so there are some other things that you're going to notice as you're going through this. We've done a few things a little bit differently than the model in terms of the boards and departments. I wanted to mention that as well. We have tried to not list every board, every authority, every department in this charter. The model typically does not do that, but there are some that are mentioned in our charter now that we don't want to take away. And so those things so you may ask, why is this included in this department? Not included. It's typically included in this draft because it was included in the original draft of the charter. Let me just go through and give you a few highlights of what we've done. And again, we've removed a lot of the things that we don't do anymore. There were, for instance, about 10 pages or so of things about paving, how we do paving and street works and things like that, that you either don't do or you don't need in the charter. You can do it by ordinance or resolution. So those things we moved. There's a whole section about the school system and how to start it on August 27th of 1910. Those things are now in state law. And so those things, there's just a reference to the school system rather than the lengthy portion about that. There are a number of things like that that are outdated that were removed. And then we went through and restructured it to make it streamlined and to give you the things that you need now. We tried to go through and give mayor and council every power, again, that you could, that you need now or that you may need in the future. Those are listed in section 1.12. You'll see there are 42 enumerated powers. And this ends with a power, it begins and ends with granting the city council essentially anything that the state allows. And so we believe that encompasses what's needed in terms of grant of authority. We've also restructured the charter to reflect how the mayor and council operate and how the city administrator operates. Mayor and council are to be the board of directors of this Micro Corporation board of directors. And you see the administrator functions really as the CEO. And that's how we've got it structured. In section 2.16, mayor and council under this charter have the authority to appoint and remove all department heads. And then under section 2.29, the city administrator is given the operational authority and some clarity about operational authority in that position. And so under that section, every department head reports to the city administrator, which is basically what you've been doing, but we now put that in the charter. In terms of some of these boards and commissions, what we have currently, there are a hodgepodge of responsibilities. Different commissions and different authorities have some different responsibilities. Typically, what the model recommends and what typically cities are doing is that these commissions that are citizen-run, citizen-led commissions have some oversight. They are able to make some decisions, but they're not conflicting with the things that elected officials should do, or that the model showed the elected officials should do. And so in going through GMA's recommendations and going through our survey of what other charters are doing, these commissions are doing things like bringing to light concerns, they're reviewing financials, they're doing some things like the PSC does now in terms of alcohol violations. They're having some quasi judicial functions that mayor and council, you don't want to have an alcohol hearing at mayor and council, but you do want to have a hearing, a place for that hearing in the PSC, and then have a recommendation. Those things remain, but in terms of decision making, like hiring and firing of department heads, those go all to the city council, the mayor and council. So those are.
Can you talk about what GMA recommends about the power to hire and fire department heads? What's the best practice?
It's to be with elected officials, and that's the general practice across the state, is that elected officials have that responsibility, because you're subject to the voters and ultimately responsible to them.
Can you talk about what our charter previously stated, just clarification?
So that's part of the problem. There are some conflicting things there in terms of many of the department heads, mayor and council was doing the hiring and removal. PSC, for instance, So it had control over department head hiring and removal. The rec commission, there was also some confusion, I think, about how that functioned, and so this provides clarity for that. There are some changes in the Dalton utility provision, and I'll point you to those sections. A lot of that was just restructuring and providing some clarity to language, but there are two major issues. One is the transfer payment. That's in section 8.17. You'll find that. And it's not a change, really. It's essentially what you're doing now. You're agreeing on the transfer payment, and then you make that in the ordinance. That's reflected in the ordinance. That's just not been in the charter, and so that's something that we memorialized there.
Would that be too specific though, to have that in there? Because we've talked about being, well, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but to have
Sure.
broader strokes in the charter, is that kind of too specific?
Well, the way that it's drafted is it talks about excess funds, and look at the language. It's pretty general about that, how that's done.
What are the other cities?
In terms of a transfer payment,
As far as you know, how they spell that?
well, not everybody has a city-run utility like that.
The ones that do, there's plenty that do.
Ken, do you have?
I didn't find anything similar to the, in a charter. There might, and I wasn't looking at ordinances, it may have been handled via ordinance. And sort of, I think, close, instead of putting a formula in this, it just sort of speaks that there will be a transfer payment. And that could certainly be handled by resolution or ordinance as it goes forward. We want to lock into some kind of formula, you'd have to amend the charter to address.
So it's a general statement. You make the actual decision about it in an ordinance.
Well, it's general, but you put in there that it's by agreement of the mayor and council board, not what the mayor and council decides.
And these are, we've received input from all departments about this. We've gone through the drafts. This is a starting point. And so it may change. You may want it to change. That's a policy. What's policy decision?
We compare ourselves to peer cities all the time. Gainesville, LaGrange, Rome, see what theirs says.
Okay.
They've all got utilities.
Okay. Make a note to look at that specifically. The other issue with Dalton Utilities is the referendum, and it's in section 8.19. And what this says essentially is there will need to be a public referendum in order to dissolve the utility or sell all the assets. And again, it's a policy decision that you all need to go through and talk about. But I wanted to point that out. That's one of the major changes there.
Was that not in the previous charter?
That's not in the previous charter. The other changes are essentially restructuring this just to go in the form of a model, and we used a lot of model language. We had the Dalton specific items that needed to be in it, and then included the model language. And so that's essentially it. Those are the highlights. I do want to talk about what needs to be done next. Andrew mentioned that. We think that, again, you're going to have some questions about this. This is the starting point. It's going to take some time to go through and make some of these policy decisions. So email Bernadette, let us know, and we'll go through and research these things like the rotation utilities. We think that you need to also go through all of the ordinances. I think this is an important thing to make sure that what we're doing with the charter lines up with what you have in the ordinances. Typically, you want to do this at the same time. Muni code is not going to go through once the legislature passes this and enacts the charter. Muni code is not going to go through and determine what conflicts and what doesn't. There is a repealer section at the end of this that says that anything in conflict with the charter is repealed, but they're not going to go through and make those determinations, those judgment calls. And so for clarity, you really need to go through and do that. We would suggest that take the time to go through all of the ordinances, pull out the things that don't apply anymore, add the things that may need to be added in light of this. We may want to make some changes to the charter in light of that review, get it organized, and then repass all of the ordinances. That would be our suggestion.
Why don't we go ahead and do that now?
Well, you let us know that we're okay to do that, and we'll do that.
The order, I would imagine that would be to get the charter right first and then see where the conflicts are.
We were tasked with getting the charter as quickly as possible because that's a project that y'all been talking about for a long time. And so we got that in place, and I think now we're in a good position to go through and look at all the ordinances and then make some adjustments to the charter too. Look at them together.
I think what you're saying is you get a review of the ordinance before you take it out of general.
I think so.
Yeah.
That would be our recommendation.
What's the recommendation?
To review all of the ordinances before this goes to the legislature.
Yeah, I agree. I think we definitely need to do that.
And have you been tasked with doing that too, go through the ordinances?
Not yet.
Okay.
So
You mentioned there's kind of three categories as to why something's being changed. And I've written down two of them. Can you restate what those are?
So there are some things that are in here because of state law.
Right.
There are some things that are in here because they're GMA model recommendations for good government. And there are some things that are just policy decisions that we were requested to make. We got feedback from every department, and some of these are just asked from the various departments.
Okay. Section 8, 19, the utility. What best practice, and this is never quite, go over it. I'd like to understand how this came to be.
That is a policy decision that y'all need to make. It's a request from the department. That's not a state law requirement or anything.
It's not a best practice, but
It's not in GMA's model charter.
well, I would like to see municipalities that have utilities, what their charter looks like.
Okay.
I'd like to see.
Annalee, council lady, I was under the impression that some of that input for section 8.9 actually came from mayor and council.
They come from me.
Okay,
Can come from me.
all right,
Didn't come from me, I'm the liaison.
all right.
So that was my agreement, Tom, is, if it's a best practice, then I want to know that, but I want to see some examples from some communities that.
We'll pay special attention to what other communities are doing.
Yeah.
Are there other questions?
You talking about from an aerial view or?
From y'all, anything I can answer now? I know there are a lot of things you're gonna have to.
One thing I noticed in my read through, and I obviously haven't, I mean, it hadn't been as deep a dive as I'd like to do, but I noticed there were, on decisions of hiring and firing, that it was different than when we passed ordinances in that it said that the mayor could vote on those decisions, whether or not there was a tie. I didn't know, was that in their model, the GMA model language or something?
That was from the current charter. I think I was trying to keep things,
So
but
that's
the way you would always operate it, and that seemed like something someone's talked about, and it was how it was done. We're trying not to make.
yeah, no, I guess I didn't really know, of course, the old charter, so, you know, it's combobulated, but so that was somewhere in the old charter.
Some of those, it's like in two specific places about, is it the city administrator voting for his raise or job, I think mayor votes regardless of time.
But did you vote in those cases without it being a tie?
What difference would it make?
It just,
There's
I
some
didn't
things that
know.
are just historically, this is what Dalton's.
yeah, and I guess we just need to look at all of it.
And that's kind of the judgment call I was talking about, when it was a toss up, we sort of went with, what are they doing now, and we might as well keep it.
when we look at things like solid waste disposal, if we have a cool, a joint authority with the county, what about the joint authorities that we have? Where will that be addressed?
So it's not in the charter specifically. You've got broad authority to do those types of things, so this doesn't change those things.
Is there a reason that it got, like, the numbers got switched around from like the old charter?
The numbering is all different. We went through and just did a total redo.
The framework is the GMA model charter, so that's where the numbering comes from, because if you started with that, plug in specific dollars.
In the old charter really was product hundreds right here.
Right.
Well, I just noticed in section 2-11, about council members, and if a council member has to move out of their assigned one, they're supposed to resign immediately. Stuff like that may be a little too restrictive, if your house burns down and you gotta find some place to live. Is that something we need to address here?
In the charter, I think this is this model language, or is this may have been what we had before.
No, it's a new language.
I think I can speak to that. I think we've had that come up before where a council member moved district with, and the existing charter is just silent as to their responsibilities to notify the city and or, give up their seat, so to speak. And so we just wanted to provide some clarification to staff. If there is a move, but I see what you're saying, there's probably a need to amend that language to, if there's an emergency situation or something like that.
Should the charter address remote meetings, the ability to use remote meetings? And
I think on that, we just fall back to the Open Meetings Act.
Okay, stay.
We've discussed that, but felt like anything to do with open meetings requirements or open records requirements, we would just default to the state law.
Okay.
There is one thing, again, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but under the mayor and council members, one of the provisions was it was tied to the date of the election, and the other one was tied to the date of qualification. I think that's probably something.
I think we did that because it was easier because of to find that date and do the work at that time. But is that correct? I don't know, we had a discussion about that as to why we thought it came to do.
You're just saying, why is one of them election though, and the other one's qualification as to the different, one of them's section 2.11, where you say, nobody shall be eligible, blah, 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 unless they live there for a continuous period, at least 12 months prior to the date of the election. But then you go down below that, and in addition to the above, no person should be able to serve unless that person has been a resident, blah, 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 6 months prior to their qualification. So it seems like you should do one of them.
You're right. I didn't.
I just did, yeah. But again, that's sort of in the weeds there.
Good catch. We're still on the draft.
I just thought that should be made consistent one way or the other. Yeah, otherwise it doesn't really make a lot of sense.
I don't think so. Is that a GMA recommendation? Keep people from like moving, hopping around?
No, it's basically because it's happened. And there was no regulations, so we didn't know what to do. Not what to move out of the system.
Well, what is the normal? Once again, what do everybody else do?
This language came directly from our current charter.
What did
The recommendation didn't really say, we have to be specific to the wards that we have.
There is a model GMA
What do
does.
they say? You say 6 months or 12 months?
Oh, for that, I don't remember. It probably does.
And part of that is your decision as to what you would like to see. Well, it's just a draft, so if you decide it's
know, to, maybe that's not as applicable adult.
We'll check
I don't recall
that.
offhand, but we can find out.
Yeah.
I feel for these, I feel for these guys a little bit because I did a whole charter revision when I was the attorney for the city of Port Oak. And, you know, I got those kind of, what do they do in other cities? Well, there's 400 some cities in the state. I'm sure it varies considerably. You want me to call 400 something of them?
But the GMA though should have a model.
They did have a model, but not for everything.
It's 12 months in the GMA.
What's ours been?
2.1.
I believe our existing mayor, the existing charter is in the back of your packet. I think it's 3 months per council member, and it's just silent as the mayor.
The GMA said it to be
12 months.
Well, of course, the mayor doesn't matter, as long as he lives in the city.
Well, saying, yeah,
Oh, we could
you've
just-
got to live
yeah.
12 months in the city prior to qualifying.
So the present charter is 3 months.
3 months. This, the reference is section 3.4 in the existing charter.
And again, it's somewhat requested, I've had to research this, but there are attorney general opinions and judicial opinions in situations where people have had to move emergently. That's a temporary sojourn, and as long as there's some factual intent to reestablish that they don't lose their seat, but I think the charter needs to be clear.
But GMA says it needs to be 12 months for these.
That's the bottom line.
That's their
I
model.
know, that's what I know.
More limiting than what we have. 3 months versus.
Ours is 3 months, right?
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So you only have to live there 3 months. That's what I'm saying. It's theirs is much more restricted.
You can't ask them what's the reason, you know, what's their logical reason for 12 months versus 6 months, 3 months, whatever.
Some guy sitting in a cubicle down at GMA.
That's it. Thanks for the call.
Somebody's been around.
Been around a while.
They're not just a guy that buys.
That's right. It's just moved in.
You gotta pick a day, you gotta pick an amount of time.
That would probably be the intent. Somebody's been in the city.
Well, again, today, I just wanted to provide you a broad overview of what
Tell me
we
your opinion.
got here.
What are the big changes?
The big changes are we removed the things that we didn't need anymore.
I understand that.
We changed we made very clear that the mayor and council deal with the department heads, hiring fire department heads. And that the city administrator has operational authority. And then we have the DU changes. Those are the major changes.
Let's go through the DU changes if we can,
Okay.
and how they, if they're best practice or where we need to go, because it's a huge asset. Like, I'm not trying to give it the lion's share of attention, but it kind of warrants that, so.
$1 million asset.
I don't want to spend, a fair amount of time.
We'll certainly research and find out what others are doing.
Okay.
I've seen several emails going back and forth from the PSC. What's the big changes there?
The big change is the PSC would not be doing hiring or terminating of department heads, the chief of police, chief of fire anymore. That would go to you.
But has our practice not been recently, and this may be to Mr. Bisson having been there, and Jonathan, you were there too, and Terry, did anyone speak up? When I came on council, we were hiring Chief Kaysen. And it was put, maybe I misunderstood, but it was put to me that the recommendation came from the Public Safety Commission that we offer the employment. So where's the change?
It's not exactly the way the charter reads.
And we pulled the minutes to that, and the PSC clearly hired Chief Casey and Chief Payne. We just pulled the two most recent, and then their very next action at the council meeting was simply to be sworn in. Or to be.
That was my recollection of the years I represented.
The existing charter makes it clear that authority resides with the PSC. And another example I'll give is the rec commission and rec department director. Shortly after I was appointed in August of 21, one of my first duties was to work with the commission to hire a rec department, Parks and Rec department director. Those lines were a little blurry also because the commission in the past had taken a more active role in the selection and hiring of that department head. And we agreed that the commission and the city staff, myself, the HR director, Greg Bass, would conduct those interviews jointly and make a joint recommendation to the mayor and council, who then voted to confirm our director. And under the new proposed charter, that's how I would envision that process working as well. Interviews would be conducted simultaneously, and you would have a joint recommendation. Hopefully we're on the same page as the rec commission and city staff were as to the rec director, and then the council would actually vote to appoint that person.
So we didn't vote to say all of Chief Cason and say aye.
No, we pulled the minutes.
What do other cities do?
Could I make one comment?
Hey, Gary.
Hey, I'm Terry Mathis with the Public Safety Commission as well. Our members here, and I've been on the public safety for about 18 years, and it's always been the responsibility of the public safety to hire and fire both the fire chief and the police chief. And we did during the last two consult Greg Batch with HR and got their advice, but we kept that process independent. So as per the charter, we do that to keep the politics out of the police and fire department. And you guys have done a great job, but we act as a buffer or a gatekeeper to make sure that those are separated. And so we're certainly welcome to any input that the mayor and city council has, but we think that's one of the fundamental responsibilities of the public safety is to maintain that.
What do other cities do?
No one else that we have been able to find does what is called employee currently. Everyone else has elected officials responsible for this.
And I'm just curious, as far as the Public Safety Commission, I mean, if we're welcome to any input on any way we need to change our process, we're happy to do that. But I think the process has worked very well over the last years. I'm just curious how that would change as opposed for the mayor and city council to do that as opposed to public safety. Obviously, I assume it's supposed to be better, right? But we try to look out, not only this mayor and city council, but what about the next one, the ones 10 years from now?
Again, this is the policy decision.
That's what I want to find out. If you already know that nobody else does it. I don't even have it.
This is unique.
But so why do we reappoint the fire chief and the police chief every year? I don't reappoint, we don't reappoint, I'm looking at Greg, we don't reappoint Greg every year, but we reappoint Todd every year. Why is that practice? It's like,
It's always been in the charter.
But we reappoint Todd.
We did.
Fire marshal and fire
The
chief.
charter,
They're two
it
separate.
says that they have to be reappointed every 2 years.
to Chairman Mathis back there, maybe what I'm recollecting is that we appoint, after you all, recommend, well, I'm gonna use the word recommended because that's how it was put to me when I first came in. And that came in at the same time as both chiefs, that it's all happened at the same time. It was a recommendation, and then maybe I'm recollecting that it was an appointment that we voted, that I can remember that formality happening. So. Okay.
Any other questions?
Anything else?
Thank you. Well, thank y'all.
Yeah. If we got this straight on the ordinances, what do we?
Yeah, okay, if I could just give a quick.
Okay.
So Mr. Bledsoe mentioned the need to now, the next step is really after this, next 30 days or so, when we fine tune the shell of the charter, the next work product is to start digging into these 96 some odd code sections as it relates to things that also need to be addressed. up and until this point, really have not been in a position to take that next step. We needed to get the shell charter ready, have the public hearing today or the work session, and then begin over the next month to really get this in a position where it's 90% complete, because that will largely inform our review and cleanup of the codes as we move into the next few months. From there, what we expect to need to occur, both the city attorney and special counsel have advised me this is a significant enough change to our charter that it would be need to be amended via local act by the General Assembly, not by home rule. And so that puts us on a schedule of January 2024 for the General Assembly to consider a local act that would amend the charter as to these changes. And again, as Jonathan said, we could take the position to ask for it now, but if we determine in review of the codes that there's some additional changes that need to be made to the charter, then it seems a little bit out of order. So we would like to, again, use the month of February to get the charter in a position where it's 90% complete. Some of these key policy questions that Mr. Bledsoe raised are answered. And then once we do that, really start diving into the codes of ordinances.
Yeah, I think that's definitely more prudent way. Mr. Mayor, I know there are a lot of people here, and maybe there may be some other people that wanted to speak about different things. If they have questions about or concerns about, we maybe open up the floor if there are.
Anything they want to get on?
Anybody out?
Gonna stay here till 6 o'clock.
No. They're gonna email the questions to us.
Okay.
Your motion we adjourn?
Second.
Yeah, adjourned